Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the briefing room. I'm your host, Awoowe Hamza. Over 60 years ago, on July 28, 1951, the United Nations held a special conference where the majority of countries across the world came together to approve and sign the final version of the United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees. Its main principle is that the 1951 Convention protects refugees. It defines a refugee as a person who's outside his or her country of nationality or habitual residence, has a well-founded fear of being persecuted because of his or her race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, and is unable or unwilling to avail him or herself of the protection of that country or to return there for fear of persecution. The cornerstone of the 1951 Convention is the principle of non-refoulement contained in Article 33. According to this principle, a refugee should not be returned to a country where he or she faces serious threats to his or her life or freedom. Other rights contained in the 1951 Convention include the right to not be expelled, except under certain strictly defined conditions, the right to not be punished for illegal entry into the territory of a contracting state, the right to work, the right to housing, the right to education, the right to public relief and assistance, the right to freedom of religion, the right to access to courts, the right to freedom of movement within the territory, and the right to be issued identity and travel documents. That was 60 years ago. Today, refugees that flee their country are made to live in settlement camps designed for refugees. If we look at the three largest refugee camps in the world, there's a distinct pattern. The world's largest is Dadaab. The Dadaab refugee camp was opened in Kenya near the border with Somalia in 1991 when the Somali government collapsed. It was originally designed to accommodate 90,000 people, but has remained open ever since as the political situation in Somalia has failed to improve. The long-running drought has left people desperate for food and water across the region. This has led to a massive influx of refugees from Somalia flooding into the camp, especially since the 2011 famine. Now, just over 400,000 people live in Dadaab, making it the largest refugee camp in the world. The second largest refugee settlement in the world is in Ado in Ethiopia, which currently holds the majority of the nearly 250,000 Somali refugees in Ethiopia. It has a very similar situation to Dadaab, where it's currently heavily overcrowded, especially since the huge influx of Somalis during and after the Somali famine in 2011. Over half the population in Ado is under the age of 11. Over half. Now, the world's third largest refugee settlement is in Kakuma. Kakuma is a town located in Turkana district of northwest Kenya. The town has hosted the Kakuma refugee camp since 1992 and currently hosts over 140,000 refugees, the majority of whom are Somalis. That brings the total of Somali refugees in Kenya to 550,000, as well as another 240,000 in Ethiopia. And these figures are usually underestimated, so the figure is probably closer to 1 million Somali refugees that are currently living outside of Somalia. Now, when President Hassan Sheikh co-wrote the report about Somalia's missing million, perhaps instead of the diaspora, it should have been focused on the Somali refugees in neighboring countries. I mean, it's hard to swallow. It's hard to take in the fact that the three largest refugee camps in the world are overflowing with Somalis. I mean, we have become and we are the world's largest refugee population in such camps. So what's next? It's been over 20 years for a lot of these refugees, and there are mainly three options for the Somalis in these camps. They remain there as refugees and wait until they are repatriated to Somalia. They apply for citizenship in these neighboring countries, or they apply for third country resettlement. Now, the third option has been used by others in the past, where they have been able to go to countries such as the US and Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and many European countries. The second option isn't used very much, as most Somalis don't tend to apply for asylum in these refugee camps. I mean, figures that support this overwhelmingly can be seen in Ado in Ethiopia, where approximately 100 Somalis of the nearly 250,000 that are refugees have applied for asylum. Only 100 Somalis have applied for asylum. I mean, this shows that almost every Somali is awaiting some sense of stability in the country, so that they can return to their homeland. And with that, they are forced to choose option number one. But with the country, although slowly developing more and more, the country itself is not ready yet for these Somalis to be returned home. But they are trying to get ready for it nonetheless, which is a positive sign. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees, the UNHCR, has recently proposed the formation of a body that will handle the repatriation of Somali refugees from Kenya. Its boss, Antonio Guterres, wants the refugees to be returned home in phases, managed by a special commission. Now, the special commission will be formed by members from Kenya and Somali authorities, as well as the UNHCR itself. I mean, I think, the combination of two African countries with a white European referee to ensure that these Africans behave and negotiate in a civilized manner to ensure an acceptable return of the Somalis to their homes is pretty ridiculous. I mean, I don't know, perhaps it's a little harsh of me, but that's what it looks like, right? He stated, if we do these returns properly, they can be a positive factor for development in Somalia. On the other hand, if huge numbers of refugees go home prematurely, they could contribute to destabilization. Seriously? Like we don't already know that. We already know that Kenya hosts more than 500,000 Somali refugees, and we know that the Kenyan government has been demanding that they be returned home, following the achievement of relative peace by Amazon forces in Somalia. I mean, in December last year, the Commissioner of Refugees, Badu Katelu, ordered all refugees in urban centres back to camps because the Kenyan government thinks that many Somali refugees are sympathisers to Al-Shabaab. And in only what could be described as the white man's saviour and superiority complex, the UNHCR boss was touring the Horn of Africa. He was touring to plead with countries hosting Somali refugees to return the refugees, only based on what he called standard procedure. Now, in July, he met with the Somali government officials in Mogadishu, and he suggested that the repatriation should start with supporting those who have already voluntarily showed desire to get back. I mean, he then met with Kenya's Interior Minister, Joseph Olelenku, in Nairobi, as well as Ethiopian authorities in Addis Ababa, suggesting a pilot project under which UNHCR could help assist groups of refugees return to selected places in Somalia judged to be safe and stable. Then as conditions inside Somalia become safer, more refugees should be returned. Judged to be safe and stable. Judged by who? The UNHCR contradicts itself sometimes. I mean, the agency argued for repatriation of Somalis, but then also argues at other times that a number of places in Somalia are not yet safe because humanitarian agencies are still unable to access them. Yes, there's a vast improvement in some places of the country. We all agree on that. But the government still only controls a small section of the country. And even in heavily protected areas filled with Amazon and Somali troops, there are still attacks that killed dozens of innocent Somalis. There were no fixed dates when the project was announced on when the commission would be formed, but not at the time anyway. But what did happen was that during a summit in Addis Ababa, they spoke about this project proposed by Mr. Guterres. And according to Kenya's President, Uhuru Kenyatta, who attended the summit, the conference will be co-chaired on Somalia, and Kenya will consult with Somali stakeholders on how to resettle Somali refugees safely and orderly. Now, the conference for this project was proposed to be held in August, and in the meantime, Kenya has also called on Asian countries to support its efforts to repatriate the hundreds of thousands of Somali refugees. I mean, speaking during a breakfast meeting with a group of ambassadors from Asian countries, Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Minister Amina Mohammed said the plans for the repatriation of all Somali refugees was critical, and she hoped that the Asian countries would give their financial and economic support. Financial and economic support. She said that Kenya and Somalia had almost finished mapping out secure places in Somalia where the repatriated refugees would be relocated to. Where these places are is a mystery because it's hard to imagine taking Somalis to anywhere but their original homes. I mean, the issue of land ownership is one that is still heavily contested. But still, for a while now, Kenya has pressed to repatriate Somali refugees to areas liberated from Al-Shabaab and requested the international community to help with the process, saying that their large presence in Kenya destabilizes the country. Since then, the Kenyan government has postponed the two-day international conference to give time to the Somali government to consult and build consensus on the repatriation and reintegration exercise. Basically, in my opinion, the statement by the Kenyan government means it's telling the Somali government to convince the rest of the Somalis and the international community that this is the best way forward and that they should all support it. Now the problem with that is that the ones that are repatriated too soon will no longer be called refugees, but instead they'll be IDPs, internally displaced people. And the Somali IDPs currently in the country face situations that are not much better. This is because the Somali government plans to relocate thousands of internally displaced persons currently living in Mogadishu to camps on the outskirts of the city, even though there are concerns over inadequate security and access to services in these proposed relocation areas. There are approximately 370,000 Somali IDPs within the country, living in difficult conditions, including the threat of extortion and eviction. According to Mayor Mohammed Ahmed Noor, also known as Tarzan, the government plans for about 270,000 of them to be relocated to 3 camps on the outskirts of Mogadishu. Now, will the same issues regarding insecurity, including rape and other forms of sexual and gender-based violence, be addressed in these new camps, or will it just be the same? I mean, look, I truly hope that there's some change, and as long as it's positive and for the best of the people, then alhamdulillah. I am concerned, though, as I said before, about the issue of land disputes. I mean, land disputes have constantly been a source for the re-eruption of violence. And how does that work anyway? I mean, the majority of Somalis in these IDP and refugee camps are women and children. And since it's customary for men to inherit land, does that mean that the land no longer belongs to the wives and children of these men who might have passed away, of these owners who might have passed away? Does it not go to the wives and children? Or does it go to the man's brother or cousin or uncle? I mean, it's one of the key issues that the Somali government needs to look into, because without it, it would become extremely difficult to repatriate anyone, whether they are outside or inside the country. The real immediate issue, though, are the reports by Amnesty International that thousands of people are being forcibly evicted from makeshift camps in Mogadishu by the government. I mean, on August 14, 2013, an 8-year-old child and a mother of 9 were killed, where members of the armed forces opened fire on them. And this was in response to a protest by the residents of Mogadishu's Holland district facing eviction. Now have a look at this. It's a map of IDP camps in Mogadishu. The red-coloured ones are newly opened. The green ones are the ones currently open. Now take note of all the purple ones. You see them dotted around everywhere? These are all the IDP camps that have been closed over the last year. And it's moments like these that destroy the carefully built progress that so many have worked so hard for within the country. I mean, the government argues that they need the government property these IDPs are living on, and that they have been given 2 months' notice. Still, it's an area where we urge the Somali government to really look towards what is best for Somalis as a whole. And I urge everyone to research this more and understand the difficulty within the country. We all tend to agree with the intentions of what the Somali government is trying to achieve, but their methodologies sometimes leave me a little confused. Now, I'll see you right after the break, where we'll look into the return of the diaspora. Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm your host, Awoowe Hamza. Diaspora, originally from the Greek verb for dispersion, diaspora, refers to the movement of a scattered population outside its original homeland. A specific 19th century example is the Irish diaspora, beginning in the mid-19th century and brought about by the Angor Tamor, or the Great Hunger of the Irish Famine. Estimates are that between 45 and 85% of Ireland's population emigrated to countries including Britain, the US, Canada, Argentina, Australia and New Zealand. Now, if we look at the number of people around the world who claim Irish ancestry in the 21st century, some sources put the figure at 80 to 100 million, which includes more than 36 million Americans who claim Irish as their primary ethnicity. But if we look at how the Irish government defines their diaspora, this number is nearer to 3 million. This would mean that 40% of its population is currently living and working abroad. That is still a high number. The Chinese have over 35 million diaspora members, and India is well over 25 million. But with their populations being over 1 billion, it's only approximately 3% of their population. Now let's look at the Somali people. With approximately 9 to 10 million people and 3 million Somalis living outside of the country, including refugees, those that are now citizens of neighbouring East African countries, and diaspora members, this means that 1 in 4 Somalis are outside of the country. That is a staggering number. 1 in 4 Somalis. The benefit of this has been, though, that those in the diaspora have been able to economically support the country by sending money back home. Now, over 40% of the country's income is because of the remittances sent back home by Somalis across the globe, estimated at nearly $2 billion every year, dwarfing any aid amount spent in the country by international donors. But with the country on the verge of stabilization and hopeful signs constantly increasing, the diaspora is increasingly returning back home to either work or set up businesses, both which can help the redevelopment of the nation.
Somalia waa wadan qiimo weyn leh.
And for millions of Somalis
living in diaspora communities around the world,
it will always be home.
This year, a new documentary series
will follow 3 individuals
who are leaving their lives behind
in North America, Europe and Kenya
to return to Somalia's capital, Mogadishu.
We will look beyond the shock journalism
that's documented Somalia's recent history
and discover what it is really like
inside the homes,
markets,
businesses
and hospitals
in one of East Africa's most volatile cities.
If you're about to relocate to Mogadishu,
or if you run a business or NGO in the capital,
we would like to hear from you.
Thousands of Somalis are making that long journey home.
so what draws them back?
We will find out across this documentary series,
online and on TV.
as we follow them
Ku laabanaya waddankoodii Soomaaliya.
back to Somalia.
Back to Somalia.
What you just saw was a project called Return to Somalia. You can catch them on their website, returntosomalia.com, to get in touch with them. Now, Somalis all over the world are making plans to go back, but with that, there can be some friction. Having read a recent Al Jazeera article by Hamza Mohammed, it's becoming clearer how many Somalis back home view the returning diaspora. The article describes meetings held in universities by local Somalis to discuss how they see the diaspora, the returning diaspora, as their new threat. They each shared how they feel that the returning diaspora has taken their jobs, and they partly blame this on the government, as they are acutely aware that the majority of the cabinet ministers are former diaspora members. And look, they have a point. If you have lived in the country your whole life, it will be difficult to have gained 5 to 10 years of work experience in a certain field, whereas the members of the diaspora have had a better chance at starting careers and getting that experience coupled with Western education. We all want to help our nation in any way we can. And although a lot of the youth who go back do so because they want to use their experience to help the country, it can sometimes have a negative impact on the view that the local society holds for those who returned. And there's a flip side to this though, because there are some who do not return as willingly. And we all know about those. I mean, we all know about the term, dhaqan celis. The Somali youngsters who are sent back to their home country by their parents because the parents disagreed with their lifestyles in the West. Channel 4's Jamal Osman did a report on this in June 2012, and here are a few clips from that.
Of all the UK's communities, young Somalis perhaps face the biggest challenge. They have some of the worst records in education, employment and youth crime.
Do you know any friends who got into trouble?
Half of them are in prison.
Yeah, half of our friends.
Half of your friends are in prison.
Mostly Somalian as well.
They find themselves alienated from traditional Somali culture, but not fitting into British society either.
This country is just, when you get mixed with the wrong people, that's when it fails, innit? So I don't know many people that have succeeded in life, like got a job in that.
Their parents are in despair. Hundreds of them have decided the best thing to do is to send their children back to Somalia. Local residents say more and more British youngsters are coming to Hargeisa. So many, in fact, that they even have a word for them, dhaqan celis, which loosely translates the rehabilitation community. But they are all loving their new status here.
I'd say we were middle class there, but we're upper class here.
We're not even middle class down there,
Yeah. Now you have high class, middle class, then low class, then black class. Black African class. We're like the bottom down there, but here we're the top.
The money their parents send from the UK funds a more privileged lifestyle in Hargeisa. Privileged, upper class, but not yet accepted as part of society.
Now, even though I don't agree with some of the selective reporting done in this special report, there is still a real concern that the young Somalis who are returning for these reasons are not improving the situation at all. The return of the positively contributing members of the diaspora, however, remains a balancing act because they contribute to the economy by buying houses and building businesses. But because they are spending so much money, prices are going up to amounts that are easily affordable to the diaspora still, but are out of the price range of the locals who live there. I mean, there are even stories of young Somali guys who pretend to be from the diaspora just to be able to get the attention of some of the girls, and that they have difficulty matching the minimum $10,000 weddings that the diaspora returnees are throwing for their brides back home. Still, there are quite a few examples of diaspora members that have returned and set up businesses or institutions. Examples include the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center, who tries to create equal opportunities for the most vulnerable members of society. Another example is the Heritage Institute for Policy Studies, a Mogadishu-based think tank started by diaspora members. There have been 2 TEDx conferences held in the capital to promote the development of Mogadishu by both locals and diaspora members. And after that, there's so many more examples, but there's also a well-known Somali restaurant owner in Mogadishu who has continued expanding. Ahmed Jama owns the village restaurants and is one of the returning diaspora members. He came back 4 years ago from the UK and invested to build his restaurants up. But things haven't always gone as well as anyone might have wanted. So far, twice he has been attacked by Al-Shabaab. The first in the attack last September, where 14 people were killed. And also a few weeks ago, where over 15 people died. Yet he continues to persevere, and he has plans to reopen the restaurant again after he has finished rebuilding it. I mean, amazing achievements are being made back in Mogadishu. But perhaps that is part of the problem. It is so concentrated. I mean, you don't hear many stories from Kismayo being rebuilt like that, or Bosaso, or Marka, or areas around Galmudug. All you hear is Mogadishu rising, Mogadishu's redevelopment. And that's one of the major issues of the old Siad government. The country was just too focused on its capital. It's almost like a one-city state. The redevelopment is needed everywhere, and we need to hear the success stories from all across the nation. I truly applaud those who have gone back, and even more so to those who have never left and are still hopeful. But if we look at Somaliland, Somaliland prides itself on the contribution of the diaspora towards the reconstruction. I mean, the diaspora are actively involved in all aspects of Somaliland, setting up businesses, getting involved in politics, and taking up jobs and moving back. But because this has been happening for the last 20 years, there are not many complaints about returning diaspora members taking all the opportunities available. The question is, will South and Central Somalia be in the same position as Somaliland 10 to 20 years from now? Or will the situation be worse than it is now? It's difficult to rebuild a country and its institutions, and there are expected teething problems when going through this. The important thing is that everybody needs to work together to strike a balance. The diaspora is needed for its knowledge and expertise, and its economic investments. However, the locals are also required to be given opportunities to be able to develop with the nation and to play an active part in the redevelopment of the country. If they are unable to have the chance to get involved, how else will a country develop if its society remains stagnant? The social ailments need to be addressed, and the government has an important part to play in that. I mean, there are talks currently that any diaspora member wanting to work back home, especially those wanting to get involved in politics, should give up their Western passports. It's not a notion that I agree with, because there's nothing wrong with holding dual passports. Diaspora members should not be punished for having been given those opportunities in the West to develop their careers and improve their education. And in the same way, Those that have stayed behind for whatever reason should not be worse off when it comes to job opportunities by returning diaspora members. See, everything about this is all about striking a balance. There are many ways to help the rebuilding of our nation, and we have to remember that we should help rebuild our society back home. We should help rebuild it, not take our place at the top of society as if we are the elite. Somalis for Somalis. Brothers and sisters helping each other. The diaspora are not, I repeat, the diaspora are not the saviors of our people, but they play an important role and should be recognized for that. The rebuilding of our nation covers many aspects, and I don't think it's right to overstress the fact that the diaspora are returning, that we constantly focus on this, because we need to build up and spread the word about all the success stories about the locals who are still in the country. Both the diaspora and the locals have played a role in destroying the country, yes, and destroying the nation, but they are also pivotal in its reconstruction. The events of the Westgate Mall attack in Nairobi hasn't made the situation any easier. Once again, the spotlight is on the returning Somali diaspora, but not for positive contributions or not even for Dakan Lilis. This time the spotlight is on us again because the government fears that young Somalis are being radicalized in the diaspora and are going back home to become terrorists. And the Western media continues to perpetuate the threat of this being so high that they are going into Somali communities all over the UK and the rest of Europe and the US to interview Somalis about their thoughts on the attack. And I don't know about you, but personally, I'm a little bit tired of hearing our people constantly having to apologize and condemn every single attack done by Al-Shabaab. And call me a conspiracy theorist, but the amount of high-level meetings being set up by the government institutions to gauge the opinion of Somalis will eventually result in more anti-terror funding for the prevent programs that they have and increasing the presence of AMISOM and delaying any notion of an exit strategy out of the country. Western countries will channel these funds through Kenya and Ethiopia and United Nations programs to increase their influence on the Somali Peninsula. They are benefiting from this more and more. Do your own research. Open up your mind. Yes, there are examples of youngsters joining Al-Shabaab, but the numbers just don't add up. But I'll stop there. We have to remember that we should check our intentions for when we return to our motherland and work together between the diaspora and the locals to ensure we rebuild the nation together. I am your host, Awoowe Hamza, and thank you for watching The Briefing Room tonight.